Much like One Piece, the My Hero Academia verse is carried by poorly done pixel scales and misinformation, so let's debunk that starting with speed. The author has already heavily debunked any of the arguments by confirming that the fastest All Might has ever run is only Mach 10 levels of speed. And I'm sure that somebody is already typing that running speed and combat speed are different, except surprise surprise, characters run during fights, All Might 2 runs during fights, as hard as that seems to believe. All Might has already run fast enough to avoid attacks from Wolfgram, and to also close the gap between himself and enemies such as All for One and Wolfgram faster than they can react oftentimes. And keep in mind that Wolfgram's attacks are at least on the same caliber of speed as the entire main cast's attacks, thus downscaling the entire main cast's combat speed below Mach 10. And while this movie only takes place after season 2 and during chapter 70, that still debunks the idea that these characters are relativistic plus at that point into the series, which many people seem to believe. There are also plenty of other times the author has gone out of his way to debunk the characters being anywhere near light speed, even later into the series. In chapter 244, Todoroki running faster than the characters can hear is considered an insane speed feat for Deku, with Deku himself noting that this is beyond just speed. In chapter 390, Shoto and Rida required to amp their speed with advanced technology to reach transonic levels of speed, which is considered an unbelievable feat by many people watching, implying it's not often such speed is seen in the verse. This means that their speed while amped is anywhere from Mach 0.8 to Mach 1.2, and while not amped, it's below Mach 0.8. In chapter 331, Stripes resorts to using hypersonic missiles against Shigaraki, which would make no sense whatsoever if she was hypersonic or anywhere near that level herself. In fact, her very strongest attack, which combines all of her power and the missiles, is only stated to be hypersonic, and she is basically the strongest hero at that point. This means that with external help and all of her power combined, Stripes' strongest move is between Mach 5 and Mach 10. Another thing is that fighter jets can consistently keep up with the speed of the main cast. They can also trunk enemies like Shigaraki and All for One, and also somewhat avoid their attacks and get close enough to them to potentially tag them. Deku and Stripes also in certain instances required help from fighting jets, with Deku even using them to boost his own speed. And we are already taught that fighter jets are only transonic and that a brand new technology in the form of missiles is only hypersonic, thus eliminating any possibility that those jets are simply that fast. There are only two types of arguments for My Hero Academia being relativistic equals faster than light, and I'll be debunking both. The first argument is that the characters can dodge lasers in many instances throughout the show. The issue is that just because they are referred to as lasers or light attacks does not make them the same as real lasers or real light. The lasers in My Hero Academia are not photonic and are stated to be made out of atoms as opposed to photons. This is also why they also don't appear to work like actual lasers in some instances. Thus, not only are they not photonic, in contrast to real light, but they also have light. So they are both scientifically and logically not light speed. The second argument is that Stripes supposedly dodged radio waves, which is untrue. The attack she dodged is never stated to be a radio wave, it's rather simply an air wave amped by a radio wave. To say this makes the air wave light speed is like saying that car that operates on solar panels is also light speed. There isn't a single source that ever called those attacks light speed. In contrast, the author does very often emphasize that these characters cap at hypersonic or below levels of speed and are nowhere near light speed. And I'm confident that a lot of people will be commenting about some pixel scales by Versus Battles Wiki or something of the sort about characters reacting to projectiles. The issue here is that those pixel scales rely on assumptions and the false belief that every single manga page is perfectly to scale. It assumes distances that are never given, time frames that are never given, and assumes the speed of the objects that are being reacted to, which is never really given in the show. Thus, if any actual pixel scale goes against the All Might statement straight from the author, it just means that the assumption those calculations use are wrong. Maybe the distance isn't perfectly to scale, maybe the time frame was longer than assumed, maybe the object is slower than assumed. Now, what about power? I will only cover a singular feat, which is the final punch, since it's the only notable calculation the verse has, and without it the verse stands at mountain to island level at best, though even those calculations are questionable. But as I said, this video will only address this single calculation. Basically, Deku's punch generated a shockwave that generated a gust of wind in the USA, and also supposedly changed the weather. The Versus Battle Wiki calculation takes the whole distance between Japan and the USA, then assumes that Deku must have displaced all the air between Japan and the USA, and finally assumes a speed for the air being moved based on how fast the cloud above Deku in Japan was displaced, and then finally calculates the kinetic energy. I'm sure that some of my viewers can already see the flaws in this calculation, so let's start with the main issues one by one. Much like a magnitude of their One Piece calculations, Versus Battles Wiki fails to account for the fact that not all of the air is being displaced at once. The calculation says that the fist had the kinetic energy to displace all of the air between Japan and the USA within a single second, which it calculated to 361 trillion squared meters worth of air, all in a single second. The reasoning for this is that Deku's fist displaced a cloud directly above him in in Japan in a second does the speed. This is the equivalent of saying that if I can throw a pebble at a speed of 20 meters per second, I must also have the energy to throw a gigantic boulder at 20 meters per second. That's just not how it works. Just because Deku displaced a quote in Japan in 1 second, which, mind you, is a headcanon in the first place, doesn't mean his punch is strong enough to also displace the entirety of the air between the USA and Japan in the same amount of time. Another factor versus Battles Wiki often fails to account for is the fact that the air isn't being dragged along with the punch and doesn't collect. For example, if you run your body through a body of water, the water does not magically stick to your hand into some sort of water ball like some magnet. Instead, the water simply disperses in all directions. That way, you don't have a constantly growing ball of water stuck to your arm. In the same way, when Deku's shockwave travels through the atmosphere, it doesn't collect all of air it encounters like some sort of a magnet and carry the combined weight of all of air to the USA. And on top of all of that, it also fails to account for friction, which would cause the shockwave to lose energy the more air it comes in contact with. So just because it was strong enough to push away a certain amount of air in the span of a second, doesn't mean it would continue to have the same effect the longer the shockwave goes. Naturally, the shockwave would in fact start losing energy, resulting in the displacement of air getting slower and weaker. So when we saw the quote being displaced, that would actually be the strongest and fastest display of the power of the feat, meaning that if it took 1 second to displace that quote, everything after would actually be slower and weaker. And beyond all of that, all the failed logic in this calculation, the premise itself is actually not true whatsoever. The calculation claims that there was a massive thunder cloud that spanned from Japan to the USA, and Deku must have destroyed it to change the latter to be sunny in the USA. That's not true, however, in the slightest. It was stated that the thundercloud could move towards the USA eventually, not that it was so large that it already covered all of Japan and the USA simultaneously. In fact, the reporter later apologizes for being so off the mark on her forecast, which implies that the thundercloud never actually got to travel to the USA. So all Deku actually had to do was simply disperse the thundercloud that was in Japan before it moved over to the USA. And mind you, that thundercloud wasn't even large enough to cover all of Japan. Deku never actually had to disperse an imaginary thundercloud that spanned for tens of thousands of kilometers like the calculation claims. And regarding a mild gust of wind reaching the USA from Deku's punch, first of all, this is a fodder feat, and second of all, even the My Hero Academia manga acknowledges the butterfly effect, where the flap of a butterfly's wing in Brazil can generate a hurricane in Texas. So this literally scales nowhere, and can just be a butterfly effect generated by the shockwave. So yeah, My Hero Academia is a fodder verse, Reese solves the verse, Yoru solves the verse, peace out.
Coming next, our main character, King Key, is going to prove for once and for all that Daimagoku Soul's Resurrection F